why people communicate. Right. So we have for the continued operation of what? Of business. This time around we are looking at what? Element of communication process. Element of communication process. We are now looking at the process of communication. And by this process, we can actually define communication as a 6-point process. A 6-point or 6 steps, or a process that is in 6 phases. That is, starting with what? The conception, encoding, channel, which is channel selection, decoding through the message or through to message what? Interpretation, and provision of what? Feedback. If you look at all of that, it is very simple method, and almost everybody engages in this on daily basis in our interaction with people. At times, some of these things, they happen in a jiffy. They happen in a way that what we really take notice of them or take note of them, but they are actually what they are. So by that is, we said provision of feedback by the recipient. The entire communication process may be what? May be more than the totality of this element. However, adequate understanding of this element is required to appreciate what happens when one party is expressing an idea to another. So what actually matters is, let me say, with this 6 process now, or let me say the 6 steps or phases now that we have identified, right, we can actually say communication is liable to take place, or communication is expected to take place, because these are the conditions, these are the things that can actually make communication to happen. These are the things that make communication what? To happen. So once we don't need to have more than this. We don't need to go beyond these 6. These 6 have been tested and they have been tested and they have been proven. So we can use the 6 to actually define a process of what? Communication. Once we have the 6 present, then communication is okay, is complete. But when we have one missing out of this process, then we are not likely to have a complete communication. So we say these 6 steps called the elements are very vital to any communication, very vital to any communication exercise. The first leg of the 6, that is the first one out of the 6 processes, or the 6 steps to take to a complete communication, is conception. And conception is when ideas are given birth to. The conception is when we have what we have in mind to communicate. The conception is the forming of our ideas. The conception is when our ideas begin to take shape, and when we begin to have a vision of what we want to say, or when we begin to come up with something that is the thoughts that we need, the real thing that we want to say. That is when it begins to form, right, within us. That is when the conception stage is actually what manifesting. So what's the conception stage? As we have it here, you have what the process starts with what conception of the message, So the conception there of the message or an idea may be involuntary and instantaneous. That is, it may not require any serious thought out reasoning. Others may require a more structured reasoning. It depends on, like on daily conversation, if people have to pass by and greet their fellow humans, definitely one is not expected to go back and probably relax and think over it and begin to work out plans to get back to the person that greeted him the other day. It doesn't work like that. Some they have instant answers. Some the answers wait. It depends on how serious it is, or how serious the idea that one wants to pass across, how serious it is. Not just any idea. So when we converse, when we discuss with people on general notes, or when we just want to throw banters as we used to do at times, and all those funny things, definitely one is not expecting that it has to be structured in such a way that a lot of things or variables or elements will be what put together before one can achieve that. No, we can say something immediately and receive a feedback immediately, right? It all depends on the situation. So the conception is the idea forming stage. The idea forming stage. The idea is beginning to take shape. The idea is beginning to take shape, and that is the conception aspect of it. The conception aspect of it. And of course, the second one is what? The encoding aspect. The encoding aspect. The encoding message or the encoding stage. The encoding stage. Of course, the encoding stage is having picked the idea or having stumbled on a particular idea, that is something you want to talk about. The next thing is what? To package that thing in such a way that it will be acceptable to the person that wants to receive it. That is encoding. Now we have gotten the idea, but how do we now package the idea to get it across? That is what encoding involves. You said at this stage, the sender is required to put the idea or information conceived into a most suitable and appropriate form. It is important for the sender to consider a number of factors in encoding a message, such as receivers' levels of appreciation and understanding. Then you have background, you have culture, has the duty to ensure that language, vocabulary, symbols, and the rest of them, that they will actually convey intended meaning. When we actually say encoding, to encode means to put something in a code or to use a code in order to to present something. It's even possible that the idea that one has stumbled upon is an idea that is fantastic, and almost anybody anywhere can just make use of the idea for whatever purpose, right? But that idea has to be put together in the most acceptable manner, a way that will make that idea something to pay for, something worthwhile, right? And that is the language, or perhaps the method we have to use in encoding the message. So if message is to be encoded, definitely the vital tool or the most vital tool is what? Is the language. So you choose the language. Then while choosing the language, then you have to look at the person you are communicating to. Does he have all it takes to take this, or does maybe he has to hang on me, or he has to do this, he has to do that, maybe all of that. That is encoding. Take for example, if your target person, or the person you are sending a message to, let's say a poet now writing a poem, and he targets what? Kindergarten, or he targets children across primary schools and in their KG whatever. Now, if that message is to be packaged, definitely we are not expecting much of vocabulary there, but what is enjoyable to children at that level, what we call what? Rhyme. Probably much of what? Nursery rhyme, or things that will make what? Learning easier for them, something that will make meaning to them, like pictures, like symbols and vocabulary and the rest of them. All of these things have to be what? Taken care of. So if you have the right message but encoded or use a wrong what? A wrong was in language, you have the right message but you lack the language to convey it, the person is as good as what? As devoted. It's as good as, it's as good as wasting his or her time. He is as good as wasting his or his, has not actually done the right thing, right? Because a communicator is supposed to take all of those variables into consideration. This message, the package, or the message, the source, the package, then the transmission, and the person that is going to receive it at the end of the day. All these things must be planned and taken care of in the process of what? Communication. Otherwise, the purpose for which one has gone communicating will be defeated, completely defeated. That is it. So the message, if there is a message but not probably, that is, there's a message but not probably you can have the message there is a message but not using the right medium is the problem. Selection of suitable channel. The suitability of the channel matters. The suitability of the channels matters. The suitability of the chosen medium or channel, like other factors already discussed, will impact either positively or negatively on quality teachers, on quality of the response. At this stage, the actual process of transforming the message from send to receiver takes place. What are the factors we consider in deciding on a suitable channel? You talk of the speed. There is any channel of communication you want to choose. Take for example, if you are writing to someone in America, or you want to speak with someone in America. In those days, we probably might need to wait for months until the person that goes to what, or the person that has to travels and come back. That person will travel and come back before we now have a feedback. But today, you can stay here. All you need to do is just a phone call away. You just call the person from where you are, and you get immediate feedback. So you don't need to go through or wait until eternity or till eternity before you now have your feedback. No. So communication has been very much simplified now. He said the factors to be considered in deciding on the suitable channels include what? The speed, the cost, the convenience, and confidentiality. So you have distant nature and types of what? Of message. All of these things matters. All of these things matter, rather. All of them, they matter. And they matter in communication. So if we choose, take for example, a selection of suitable channel, supposing your audience or your target audience is just people in your locality, and because of the people in your locality, you now decide to go on air, go on radio, or go on television, or go on whatever means one might decide to reach out to people, and he knows the information primarily is talking or is for those who are in the environment, who are around. And so if you now go to the radio to announce, or go to the television to announce, it's just a mere waste of time, because it's better to employ a different means to reach out. That is, if actually one wants to be effective, to reach out to the people. If one wants to be effective, the best way to reach out is to actually organize around there to reach out to these people in their respective homes. So that's why it's your selection of suitable channel. You have to choose the channel before you now talk of the other things there. And the process or things to look at in choice of channel are the receiver, the speed, and some other things like that make it up, or perhaps that make it important. All right. So we have the next one. The next one is supposed to be decoding. Here we have talked about the conception. We have talked about idea, as in the idea, which is the conception. We have talked about the encoding of the message, and we have talked about what the channel of our channel, a suitable channel of communication. And the next one is the decoding of the message, which is the fourth one. Decoding of the message. Of course, decoding is a job for the receiver, while encoding is a job for the giver of the message. Why this one, the decoder or decoding is a job is a job for the receiver of the message. A message received must be understood by the recipient in order to elicit He said the message received must be understood by the recipient in order to elicit the right response. Right? So if the message is not understood, definitely there is there is what we call barrier, right? It has to be understood. So if a message is not properly coded, that is using the right words or language to communicate it, then definitely a number of things can happen. To ensure effective understanding, it is the receiver's responsibility to attempt to break down the components of the message. So what are we talking about here? It is, you have what, let us break or attempt to break down the components. Break down the components of the message to the extent that what the message in totality makes someone or some sense to him. Then we talk of effective decoding of the message may be hampered where it is of technical nature and beyond. Then you have similarly to the receiver perceptions and emotions could affect understanding of what of the message. That's the decoding. Of course, when you get to that stage, when you get to the stage of encoding, we have identified all the variables or things that will be put into consideration before embarking on encoding a message. Of course, the what will make the message easier for the receiver to get it or to understand it, and in effect send a response, is what we mean by what? By decoding. Then of course, the word would make a to receive interpret and respond and respond. Let's call it that way, or let's call it that name, because without it there is no how. There won't be better understand. If a receiver receives a message and he cannot interpret, or she cannot interpret that message to the extent of eliciting a response, then that message is not well coded, or perhaps it is coded but it is not within the realm of understanding of what of the receiver. This part, interpreting and decoding of any message, although quite related, are two distinct and separate phases of the process. The other aspect at the other side, we explained what we mean by what the encoding, and somehow we mentioned interpreting or interpretation along with it, right? So if a message is encoded in a wrong language, interpretation will not be possible and decoding will not be possible. That is it. So if it is gotten wrong at that coding point, if it is gotten wrong at that stage, then tendencies are that every other thing is going to be affected. So, but there are two distinct concepts anyway. There can only be effective and adequate understanding of the message received if the recipient is able to interpret the message correctly. We have just said that. The sender's inability to ensure that the message is correctly encoded could also lead to what? To possible distortion of the message, with the effect that the message may be interpreted in a completely different way from the originally intended meaning. That is exactly what we are saying here. We are saying here, the interpretation depends on what? On coding. If the wrong language, wrong tone, wrong composition, wrong channel, wrong timing, what again, and the rest of them, if all those things are put in place, is that okay, to ensure or to communicate, but are done wrongly, the tendencies are that what? Communication is going to be what? When it gets to interpretation, or there's a stage of interpretation, there is going to be what? There is going to be a problem, because at that stage it's going to be difficult for the decoder to decode, because you have a multiplicity of ideas put together, and which in such a way that if he is finding it difficult to actually decipher or make meaning out of all of them. All right, and that is why we say simplicity is the rule of the game, especially in language. We say simplicity is the rule of the game. You have to be simple in order to communicate efficiently. Then you have the manner of the delivery of the message must equally be checked not to affect interpretation. So majorly, interpretation waits or depends on the encoding of the message. So if the message is properly encoded, then definitely interpretation is going to be easier for the receiver of the message. Interpretation is going to be easier. So the right right coding of message occasions a right interpretation. Is as simple as that. Right coding ensures or occasions a right interpretation. Feedback process is the last leg. The feedback process. The first 6 or the first 5 steps, if they are successful, if a message is successful at the very first 5 steps, definitely feedback is going to be right. There is going to be the right, except there is a breach. I mean, there is a hitch. Don't let me say a breach. There is a hitch in communication. A hitch as in barrier. That barrier, I can't really trace it. We can't really say the barrier is that barrier is not really what do I call it now? It's not the substance itself, but rather the hardware involved in the process of communication. Except there is something wrong with the channel. Except there is something wrong with the materials used to communicate. Right? That is when feedback might be difficult. Take for example, now you are calling someone, and the person is to feedback immediately. The person is to respond immediately. You have to get your feedback on the spot. But in the process of communication, there is a huge, probably, network problem. Right? So the line is cracking, and there is a lot of noise, and there is a lot of all these hiccups often encountered in the process of communication, especially when the weather is bad, right, affecting that instrument or piece used in communicating. That is what we are talking about. That is when the feedback will not come immediately. But outside that, you have feedback. This is when the receiver's response to the message is conveyed to the sender. Without feedbacks, communication process is not complete. Neither is it successful. Yes, communication is not a one-way thing, but rather a two-way process. And that was what actually made us to define it earlier as as a symbiotic thing. You give it and you receive it, right? Or a thing of reciprocity. It goes from you, or it comes out of you, and you receive it back, right? And that is where feedback is is involved. We say feedback requires that whereas the person sending the message go through the process of encoding and choice of medium, the recipient will have to decode and interpret. In this case, the roles are reversed. Yes, the original sender of the message becomes the receiver, while the original receiver assumes the role of a sender, depending on the type of communication. Feedback will be oral, written, or involve the use of body language. The process is interpreted just below. Those processes, you have the 6 basic processes here explained, right? So the process of body language is still part of the feedback. We can put that under the feedback. Then the oral aspect, the feedback will be oral, as in this oral, that is, it could be vocalized or it could be said. Then you have written, that is black and white. It could involve the use of body language. That is it. At times, it could involve the use of symbols at times, or signs, and the rest of them. All of these things, right, we can, if communication is properly done, all right, and all those things are happening, then one can say that is in response to the message sent. That means the person responding in those regards has actually gotten the message, right? Has actually gotten the message. So we have the 6 process here identified: conception, encoding, channel, decoding, interpreting, feedback. Of course, this one can happen either in formal systems or informal system, or in an informal system. Let's move on to the principle of effective communication. There are principles needed for effective communication to happen. What are the principles? What are the things that we have to observe? What are the things we have to go through? What are the things we need to put in place, or we need to ensure to have effective communication? Here we have bad communication skills in the long run can be costly to individual or organization. That is, in business, poor communication could greatly damage the organization's reputation and possibly put off the potential customers. So how do we now achieve effective communication? These are the things that we must take note of. That is for information, for communication to be very effective. What are the things that we must take note of? We have to choose our words. Of course, this one has been explained somewhere. You have choice of words. Choice of words. What are we saying? What are we saying? What do you mean by choice of words? If a customer comes to complain It's a right. He's exercising his or her right. So the customer has to be what? Listened to inside out, and if possible to be attended to immediately is good. But if not, then the person receiving the complaint, the management or the organization or whatever, must find a way of pacifying that particular individual. But instead of doing that, the management flares up, right, and probably maltreats or use harsh words or use a kind of language that is not what expected in a customer organization relationship. Definitely there is going to be what? Problems. So it might lead to what? Loss of that customer. It might lead to loss of image. It might lead to loss of a number of things, very many things as well. But if, despite the volatile situation, or given a situation that is what? Very volatile, but you have the right person in the saddle or in position, who now uses what? Wisdom, who uses tact, that is diplomacy. These are part of some of the things that we learn too. Who uses what? Diplomacy, in order to calm down the person. Then use words, that is, choose words to actually make the person see reason and probably downs to his or their team. Then we can have what? Effective what? Communication. And that is what is supposed to be. So choice of words matters. So harsh words has negative what? Impact. Why? What is it called? Soft words soft words have what? Have positive what? Impact. That is it. So meanwhile, situation determines whether words are to be used harshly or words are to be used what? Softly. That is some of the things that we have to learn as well. So number one thing there is what? Choice of words here. Choice of words. This matters in communication. If the word is not right, if the word is not right, communication cannot be right as well.